what's going on, everybody? This is Gerald Walker here, and I am analyzing Beethoven's Third Symphony, first movement. It's been a while since I've recorded, and I do apologize for taking so long, but I'm finally back, and I'm ready to do these things again and continue my project. We're going to be talking about forms, modulations, transitions, unusual material, and themes. All of that stuff, you guys. I hope you'll tune in as I give my overview of Beethoven's Third Symphony, Movement 1 analysis. So to begin this, we're going to start off with the fact that Beethoven's first movement of his Third Symphony is in Sonata Allegro form. Sonata in Allegro form is when you have an exposition, a development, and a recapitulation. The exposition and the recapitulation are the same thing, but the recapitulation is in the original key the entire time versus the exposition where you start off in one key and then you go toward the dominant key. It's also to note that in the exposition you have three themes, theme 1, theme 2, and you have the closing theme. In between these two sections you have the development section, which a composer can do anything they want to do, and it can be pretty exciting to see all the different stuff that they can be very creative in what they come up with. In most cases with Haydn and Mozart's time, they usually repeated the very first section, the exposition section, and they repeated the development plus the recapitulation together. But in Beethoven's sense, Beethoven doesn't really do that. Beethoven does repeat the exposition section in this example, but he doesn't repeat the development and the recapitulation. He's over that. He just moves forward. And I think he even does that within Symphony 1 and 2, actually. He just doesn't like to repeat anything after the exposition. That's just basically it. We begin this symphony with two big whiplashing chords in E flat major that then is followed by the main theme of this movement. This theme would be theme 1, and you'll hear it in the cellos. Now, the very first unusual thing that I will definitely mention is what you hear right after the theme that's derived by the cellos. You'll get this C sharp note. That note is what really takes us to a whole new world that we didn't even expect. It's duly noted that because the first theme is only 4 measures long, we automatically are starting to transition. What do we mean by transition? There's a transition section in between each theme within the exposition section. With this in mind, this means that the transition, or at least our first transition, goes from measure 7 all the way to measure 82 right before theme 2. Now there's a lot to unpack here within this section. However, I'm just going to point out all the highlights of this section. The first thing to highlight is that he uses the main theme within his transition material. You'll find this in measure 15. The next highlight of this transition you'll find between measures 23 and 36, where he uses this hemiola effect. Now, what in God's name is a hemiola? A hemiola is when you have something in 3, but you're trying to make it in 2. So it's like putting 2 into 3. So instead of something being 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Following all this hemiola stuff, we get our main theme again that's a lot bigger, still within the transition section, and then we have our next major material that he uses to transition. This thematic material that's softly done within the woodwinds and in the first violin section. This takes place at measure 45. The next highlight of the transition section is from measures 57 to 64. Beethoven does use this section 3 times within this movement. Once in the exposition, once in the recapitulation, and again in the very end at the coda of the first movement. The last piece of material that Beethoven uses is this galloping material that's in the first violins and second violins that's at measure 65. So finally, after this long transition section, we finally arrive at theme 2, B flat major, which is at measure 83. This melody, you'll find that half of it is in the woodwind section and the other half of it is in the string section. One other unusual thing that I did find while studying the score is at measure 91, you'll find that the basses, and only the basses, they will pluck at beat 2 rather than beat 1 with the cellos and everybody else. However, you'll find in a lot of other professional recordings that a lot of people pluck on beat 1, and there are some people that plucks on beat 2. Some orchestras even pluck on beat 1 in the exposition and then pluck on beat 2 in the recapitulation. Why? I have no idea. But according to my Urtext score, which I'm using, the Baron Reiter Urtext score, which is the score that's closest towards Beethoven's original intentions for how his piece was supposed to be performed, they're supposed to be plucking on beat 2. Starting from 87, here's what the recording would sound like if they plucked on beat 1. Now, here's what the recording would sound like if they plucked on beat 2. Isn't it interesting? Do you hear a difference? I don't know. Maybe it may not make that much of a difference. But to me, I think there's a harmonical difference there. But I do find that very unusual. I just wanted to mention that. After this theme 2, we get our next transition that goes from 91 to 108. Luckily for us, this transition section is not that long, and it's just trying to get us to the third theme, which it does. You'll find theme 3, or the closing theme, in measure 109, where it starts off in the violins, and then it takes us to the woodwinds. Then we get our last transition section that goes from 117 to 147. That is followed by the cadential ending, or as you could think of it as the punctuation mark that's at the end of the exposition section. Now, one highlight of this transition section, I will say, is from 123 to 131. You will notice that he brings back this hemiola effect again. It's not all hemiola, it's more towards the ending part of it. But I think it's set up with the big chords that are on beats 2 and 3. Our cadential ending you'll find at measure 148, where he's finally ready to end the exposition section, and we can finally move past all of this. Or do we? Because apparently Beethoven's trying to follow the right rules, so he feels the need to repeat everything we just did all again. And he does it very subtly, like this. This finally completes the exposition section, and now we finally at the development section. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the development section is the section where a composer can pretty much do anything they want, and they can create anything they want based off of the material that they gave us within the exposition section. Now, I know Beethoven goes through a lot of modulations within the developmental section, so I'm just going to highlight all of the main modulations that he does. The first major modulation that he does in the development section is at measure 166, where we're in the key of C major. During this section, he gives us a transition theme that he used in the exposition, only this time we get these little stabs to help push it along. This then brings us to the next major modulation section in D minor at measure 186, where Beethoven gives us the main theme and this galloping material that he used in the exposition. This section is then again repeated, but now in the key of G minor by 198. After he continues playing along with this galloping material, we then arrive at measure 220, where we're now in the key of A flat major, and he brings back that same thematical transition material that he gave us with the little stabs. This section is then followed by a fugal, a really small fugal section that's in the strings in F minor at measure 236. This fugal section plays around with the galloping material and material from theme 3. Now we get to probably what is arguably known as the most climactic part of this movement. We then arrive at measure 248, where now Beethoven wants to play around with that hemiola thing, that whole 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that sort of ordeal. It's loud, it's noisy, it's crazy, and it's just the most jarring thing that I think anyone has ever heard at this point in time. Now, one other really interesting thing that I will point out is at measure 276, where he's at the climactic point of this hemiola ordeal, where he actually gives us a F major 7th chord. That consists of the notes F, A, C, and E natural. Yes, face, in other words. I can definitely tell you that that's the first time in history anybody has ever given a chord like that loudly, and got away with it. Of course, does Beethoven care? Of course not. As a matter of fact, he doesn't care so much that at 284, after all that jarring nonsense, thinking that we'll finally come home somehow eventually, he takes us to the key of E minor and gives us a whole new theme that we've never even heard of. This theme being in the second violins and the cellos, with a counter theme being in the woodwinds. This theme is then again repeated at measure 292, but now in the key of A minor. Following this new theme, we then get the main theme again, but we're not quite in the main key yet. We're not in E flat yet. He's in C major now. He plays around with this for a bit, and then we get to 322, where now we get that new theme again, but this time it's in the key of E flat minor. We now arrive at measure 338, where Beethoven takes the main theme and he overlaps it in a series of levels within the woodwind section. Beethoven also gives us some new transitioning material that's within the lower strings. takes us to 362, where now we're in the, well, written out key C flat major, but you could also look at it as B major if you wanted to. So now it's pretty much safe to say that we are pretty much the furthest away from home possible. I mean, we're in the key of, allegedly, B major, and we're supposed to be in E flat major. That's a whole tritone away. How are we supposed to get home? Well, Beethoven finds a way. Beethoven then uses a part of the main theme to help get us back into the key of E flat. However, he does it very subtly, and he really takes his time. Very softly, very quietly. And just when you think that you just don't know what's going to happen, he brings in the theme, the main theme, in the right key with a single horn player. After two more big whiplashing chords, we are right back into the main theme, and now that closes the development section officially, and we are in the recapitulation section. This section starting at measure 398. As I said in the beginning, the recapitulation section is the same section as the exposition section. The only difference is we stay in the same key of E flat major rather than modulating to a different key. The recapitulation section goes from 398 to 556. Now, since everything is pretty much more or less the same, I'm not going to really mention much about that stuff. However, I will point out this. You remember that C sharp that we got at the very beginning of the exposition section that kind of took us for a ride for a small sec after when we heard the first theme? Well, of course, Beethoven does it again, but this time, instead of giving us the way he did it, we go into a different direction. Much more relaxing, isn't it? So we go through our transition, our theme 2, our transition, our theme 3, we do that weird hemiola stuff again, and then we finally arrive at the very end of the movement. Or do we? Of course we're not done. You think Beethoven's just going to end it like that? Nah. With that said, this brings us to measure 557, where Beethoven begins the coda section. Now, what is a coda? A coda is not a requirement in sonata and allegro form, but it's what people like to use as a tag or a little extra music to really end off the movement. And of course, Beethoven's coda is not going to be just something simple. Right at 557, he gives us the main theme, but this is now in the key of C major. He mostly plays around with this with the violins, along with an added oboe. This then takes us to measure 581, where we have that new theme that we got from the development section. It comes back again. This new theme being in the key of F minor. This theme is repeated again at measure 589, but now we're in the key of E flat minor. We then get to measures 595 to 630, where I find is very interesting. We have this chromatic-like material. Chromatic material is where you go step by step by step by step. From C to C sharp to D to E flat to E to F sharp, stuff like that. And Beethoven does that within the bassoon and within the violins during this part. Within this section, he also plays around a little bit with snippets of theme 1 and with material derived in the lower strings from the development section. Then we get to probably what is one of the best sections of this movement. From measure 631 to measure 664, we get this fugal-like material that's derived with the galloping material from the transition in the exposition, and we get theme 1 again as well. This material starts off softly with not a lot of orchestra members playing, but then it grows and gets bigger and more added instruments, and then we just get the huge E flat major theme 1. This being at measure 655. One final note that I find is unusual is at measure 655, you'll find that a lot of orchestras, some at least, they will ignore what's written there for the horns, or at least for the trumpets, I believe, and they will just play the theme in full with half notes and quarter notes, all the way up to as high as they need to, just jarring and blaring out at you, versus what Beethoven actually wrote, which is a little different. Here's one recording where the conductor changes the music to where the trumpets are blaring the melody at you. Now here's one other recording where they're actually following the music correctly. Personally, I do like it when the conductors do change the music, at least to where the trumpets sound like that. But at the same time, as a composer myself, I kind of like it better when people just follow exactly what's written. I don't know, tell me what you think is better. Now we get to that transition section that I mentioned that happens 3 times into this movement. This is where it finally happens in the coda. This section starting at 673. This section is almost identical as it was played in the recapitulation in measure 459. And now as we finally make it to the end of this movement, he plays around with that hemiola effect just a little bit, but more in a triumphant way to really end it. And we get that little development material that I mentioned that was in the lower strings. Now they're in the first violin section, leading up to the final big 2 chords that ends the symphony just as it started. So that's all that there is to it for Beethoven's Third Symphony First Movement. That's a lot of music and a lot of material. Tell me what you guys think about it. I hope you guys liked it. I know I usually do a performance at the end of the videos, but this video took me long enough to make and record and edit, so I'm not going to do that this time. But if you guys want me to do it, let me know and maybe I can put it together. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more music material. Hopefully I'll get the chance to see you next time as we analyze Beethoven's Third Symphony Movement 2 as we continue our journey in finishing this series. Until next time,